They said love protects you. They said family never turns against its own. But what if the hands that once fed you are now the same hands pushing you overboard? I still remember the salt on my lips that night. The ocean wind tasted like betrayal. My name is Evelyn Brooks, 61 years old, retired schoolteacher, mother of 2, widow for nearly a decade. I had saved every penny to take this long-awaited cruise through the Caribbean, something I'd promised myself after losing my husband, Samuel. I thought it would heal me, but instead it broke me even deeper. I boarded the ship, the Silver Horizon, on a bright Sunday morning in June. The sea shimmered like liquid glass, and the air smelled of coconuts and sunscreen. Around me, laughter and music floated from the deck, but something in my chest felt strangely heavy, like an invisible anchor dragging me down. My son, Ethan, had surprised me with the ticket, saying, "Mom, you deserve a break. Go enjoy yourself. Life's too short to keep grieving." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son, the boy I raised after his father's death, the boy I worked double shifts for, the boy I sacrificed everything to protect. Yet as I stepped onto that ship, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip wasn't really mine to enjoy. It was a test, though I didn't yet know of what. My cabin was small but cozy. Pale curtains fluttered gently as the waves rocked us forward. I unpacked my bag, smiled at the photo of Ethan and his wife Samantha, and whispered a prayer for them. Life hadn't been kind to Ethan lately. He'd lost his job 6 months ago, fallen into debt, and I had quietly helped as much as my pension allowed. I had even considered selling the house if things got worse. A mother's love knows no limits, or so I thought. That first night I couldn't sleep. The walls of the cabin creaked as though whispering secrets. Around midnight, I decided to walk the upper deck for air. That's when I saw something that froze my heart solid. Down below, near the private lounge, Ethan stood, right there, on the same ship he claimed not to be on. My son, my flesh and blood, dressed in a dark jacket, talking to a man I'd never seen before. I hid behind a pillar, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it echo. The man handed Ethan an envelope. Ethan opened it quickly, glanced at the contents, and nodded. Then he said, "It has to look like an accident. She always walks the deck after midnight." My legs gave out beneath me. I clutched the railing, the world spinning around me like the storm I suddenly felt brewing inside. My son plotting something? Against someone. Against me? I wanted to scream, to call his name, but my throat locked up. I watched as the stranger handed him something small, metallic, shiny, before both disappeared through the service door. I staggered back to my cabin, tears streaming down my face, whispering, No, it can't be true." He wouldn't. But deep down, a mother always knows when something's wrong. I didn't sleep that night nor the next. I stayed alert, my heart trembling with every creak of the floor. On the third day, a woman named Martha Gray joined my table at breakfast. She was maybe around my age, sharp eyes, calm voice, the kind of woman who seemed to see straight through people. "You look like someone carrying a storm," she said softly. I wanted to deny it, to smile and pretend, but her words struck a chord too deep to ignore. "Just tired," I murmured. She leaned closer and whispered, "Be careful who you trust on this ship. Some smiles hide knives." I froze, my spoon clinking against the coffee cup. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Let's just say," she replied, "I've seen things, and you remind me of a woman I once failed to warn." Her words haunted me. That afternoon, I saw Ethan again, this time by the bar, laughing with Samantha, who had apparently decided to join him as a surprise. They waved when they spotted me. Their smiles were too wide, too bright. My heart broke again, not because they were happy, but because I knew that kind of smile. I used to wear it myself, the one that hides guilt. That evening, I excused myself from dinner early. I needed to think, to plan. I had to know the truth before confronting him. I found Martha again near the library lounge and asked if we could talk privately. She nodded. We sat near the porthole, the sea dark and endless outside. I told her everything. The envelope, the whisper, the phrase, "Make it look like an accident." She didn't react with surprise. Instead, she sighed and said, "You need to see the ship's security officer, quietly. If what you're saying is true, your life might be in danger." My hands shook. "But he's my son," I said, voice breaking. How could a mother say her son wants her dead? Martha looked me straight in the eyes. Because love doesn't mean blindness. Sometimes saving yourself is the only way left to save them. That night, I went to the lower deck, pretending to admire the stars. I noticed Ethan walking toward me, his steps calm, his hands in his pockets. "Mom?" he called, smiling faintly. "You shouldn't be out here alone." "It's dangerous." His tone was gentle, almost caring, but his eyes, they were hollow, cold. The waves crashed softly below, and I realized that if I took one step too close to the railing, it would be over. My voice shook as I asked, "Why are you here, Ethan?" "You told me you couldn't afford a trip." He hesitated, then chuckled. "You think too much, Mom. Maybe I just wanted to surprise you." But I saw it. The faint twitch in his jaw, the way he glanced toward the dark water. My son was lying. My heart shattered, but I forced myself to smile. "I'm glad you did," I whispered, even as every instinct screamed at me to run. When I returned to my cabin, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in shaky handwriting, "Cabin B23 midnight, come alone. Don't trust your son." I stared at the paper until my vision blurred. I didn't know who sent it. Martha? Someone else? But I knew one thing. I couldn't ignore it. As the clock neared midnight, I stood by the mirror, staring at my reflection, an old woman who had believed love was eternal, now standing on the edge of her own son's deceit, and when the ship's horn echoed through the night, I knew. Something inside me had just died. The hallway outside my cabin felt colder that night, though the air conditioning hadn't changed. Every sound echoed, the shuffle of slippers, the soft hum of engines beneath the floor, the creak of metal that came with every wave. I clutched the folded note in my hand, the ink already smudged by sweat. "Cabin B23, midnight, come alone." My heart thudded in my chest like a warning drum. I almost turned back, almost. But curiosity and fear are strange twins. They push you forward when reason says to stop. The hallway leading to B deck was quiet. No passengers, just the low rumble of the ocean pressing against the hull. I reached the door. B23. My hand hovered above the handle. Then a whisper from inside made me freeze. "You came." I pushed the door open slowly, ready to scream if I had to. Inside sat Martha Gray. She looked different under the dim lamp, tense, alert, like she'd been waiting for hours. "Close the door," she said. I obeyed. "What is this about?" I asked. She pointed to the bed where a small black device lay, something like a recorder. "I planted this under your son's table earlier," she said quietly. "He met that man again. I caught part of their talk before security started their rounds." My stomach nodded. "You what?" She gestured for silence, then pressed play. At first, just static. Then voices. Ethan's. "I told you it's happening tonight. The old woman trusts me. She'll come out for air like she always does." My throat burned. The other voice, low and impatient, replied, "Make sure the cameras don't catch it. You'll get the rest of the money once it's done." Then silence. The recording clicked off. I couldn't breathe. Martha turned the device off and looked at me carefully. "He's planning it for tonight. We don't have much time." I stumbled backward until my knees hit the chair. "No, he must be forced. That man must be threatening him. He wouldn't—" My voice cracked. "You don't have to believe me," Martha said softly, "but believe what you heard." She stood, moved toward the window, and drew the curtain slightly. "Listen, I've been following this man since the ship left port. He's done this before, working with relatives, faking accidents for insurance payouts. Your son isn't the first, but we can make sure he's the last." Her words cut through me like glass. Insurance. My husband's old policy. The one that transferred to me after his death. Ethan had asked about it months ago, casually, over dinner. My hands trembled. "What do we do?" I whispered. Martha turned, her eyes steady. "We need proof stronger than a recording. something that will stand when this reaches the authorities. The security chief won't act without evidence of a threat. We'll need him to make a move and catch him in the act. The words chilled me. You're saying we let him try? She nodded grimly. It's the only way. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to hide in my cabin until we reached shore. But deep down, I knew running wouldn't stop the storm. He'd just try again. Another way. Another time. Maybe at home. Maybe worse, so we planned. Martha knew the security officer, a man named Captain Douglas Hale, a retired naval officer who had seen too much and trusted too little. He won't act on emotions, she warned. We'll have to show him something real. At 11:30, I went to my cabin and pretended to sleep. The lights outside flickered faintly through the curtains. I heard footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate, passing my door. My breath caught. Then silence. I waited another 10 minutes before slipping into my robe and stepping into the corridor. Martha waited at the far end, hidden in the shadow of a service cart. She nodded, signaling the tiny microphone pinned to her collar. He's moving toward the upper deck, she whispered. Security's watching, but stay close. We need him to make contact. We crept up the narrow staircase, the ship creaking under the night waves. The deck was empty except for the sound of the sea and the faint hum of the engines. The moonlight stretched silver across the water like a trail leading nowhere. Then I saw him. Ethan, my boy, standing near the railing, hands shoved in his pockets, looking out at the horizon like a man waiting for his cue. I wanted to call his name, but Martha touched my arm. Not yet. We stayed hidden behind a stack of deck chairs. I saw him take out his phone, dial, and whisper, "She's not here yet. Maybe she changed her routine." A pause. "No, I'll handle it." Then he turned and looked right at me. My heart stopped. He walked forward, slow, almost casual. "Mom?" His voice was calm, too calm. "What are you doing out here?" I swallowed hard. "I couldn't sleep," I said. "The sea helps me think." He smiled faintly, stepping closer. "You shouldn't wander at night. Accidents happen." My pulse raced. "I'm not worried," I said, forcing a smile. "After all, I'm with you." His smile faltered for half a second, then returned. "Right, with me." Behind me, Martha whispered into her mic, "Captain, move now." Ethan reached into his pocket. My knees went weak. For a moment, time slowed. The sound of the waves, the wind, my heartbeat all blending into one unbearable note. He pulled out something shiny, metal glinting under moonlight. Then, footsteps, loud, fast. Captain Hale and two officers burst from the shadows shouting, "Hands up!" Ethan froze, spinning around, the object falling to the deck. It wasn't a gun. It was a wrench, heavy, old, used for tightening rail bolts. But his face said everything. They grabbed him before he could move. He didn't fight. He just looked at me, those brown eyes I'd once kissed goodnight, and whispered, "You shouldn't have followed me, Mom." My whole body shook. "Why, Ethan?" I managed. "Why would you do this?" He didn't answer, just stared past me at the endless ocean. The officers cuffed him and led him below deck. Martha stayed by my side, steadying me as I trembled. When we reached the security office, Captain Hale showed me the text messages found on Ethan's phone, threads of conversation with a contact saved only as J. "Make it look like a fall. Payment after confirmation." Another message. "Transfer half now." "I'll handle it." The captain looked at me with pity. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We'll keep him detained until we reach the next port." I nodded, numb. Martha placed her hand on mine. "You did what you had to do, but I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow, like something sacred had been torn from me. That night, I sat alone in my cabin, the ship rocking gently under a sky full of stars. The waves outside whispered a lullaby I couldn't bear to hear. My son's words echoed in my head. "You shouldn't have followed me, Mom." Somewhere between the rhythm of the sea and the ache in my chest, I realized love can blind us more deeply than hate ever could. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't surviving the betrayal. It's living with the truth that the betrayal came from the person you loved the most. The morning after that storm felt eerily calm, like the world was pretending everything was fine when deep down it knew something was broken. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand, staring at the empty chair across from me. That chair used to hold laughter, arguments, and those quiet moments when words weren't needed at all. But now it was just wood and silence. I remember reaching for my phone, scrolling through photos I should have deleted months ago. There we were, smiling at some fair, my hand on his shoulder, his eyes squinting in that goofy way I used to love. It was like watching ghosts dance in a memory I couldn't step back into. I wanted to call him, just one more time, to ask why, to ask if any of it meant something real. But my pride whispered, "Don't you dare." And pride, for all its sharp edges, can feel safer than hope sometimes. So I stayed quiet. Instead, I went to work pretending life hadn't stopped. My coworkers smiled and said things like, "You look great," or "You're so strong." They didn't see the ache behind my smile, the way my hands trembled when I tried to type his name in a search bar just to see if he was okay. That afternoon, as the sun burned low in the sky, I got a call. It was from Mrs. Harris, his mother. Her voice shook. "Sweetheart, can you come by? There's something I need to tell you." My heart stopped. Every possible thought raced through me. He's sick, he's hurt, he's gone. I drove faster than I should have, the world outside blurring into streaks of orange and gray. When I reached her house, the air felt heavy, almost sacred, like the universe itself was holding its breath. She opened the door slowly, her eyes red, her hands trembling around a folded piece of paper. "He wanted you to have this," she said, handing it to me. I didn't even sit down. I just stood there in her dim living room, staring at that note like it might catch fire if I looked too long. My hands shook as I unfolded it. His handwriting. Messy, uneven, but still so him. The letter began simply, "If you're reading this, I guess I finally ran out of excuses." My breath caught. He went on to say he'd been drowning for a long time, not just in guilt, but in the fear that he wasn't enough for anyone, least of all me. He said he had dreams that never found ground, and he'd been running from everything that reminded him of his failures, including love. He wrote, "You were the light, but I didn't know how to stand in it without feeling burned." My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor, clutching that letter like it was the last heartbeat of something holy. He apologized for the lies, for the silence, for the way he walked away. But what broke me wasn't the apology. It was his last line. "I never stopped loving you. I just stopped believing I deserved to." Tears fell before I even knew I was crying. Mrs. Harris sat beside me, resting her hand on mine. She whispered, "He left last night. Drove off near the old bridge. They found his car this morning." I couldn't breathe. It felt like the room was closing in on me, the walls bending under the weight of grief. Every word I wanted to scream got stuck in my throat. I thought of the nights I begged him to talk, the mornings I waited for a message that never came, the prayers I whispered for God to bring him peace. And now he was gone. Forever. That night I drove to the old bridge. The wind was cold and sharp, cutting through my jacket, carrying the smell of river water and rain. I stood there for hours, staring into the black water below, thinking about how easy it is for love to become both salvation and destruction. The moonlight shimmered on the surface, and I swear I heard his voice. Soft, like a breeze through memory. "I'm sorry." Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe souls really do linger where they loved most. I whispered back, "I forgive you." The words broke something open in me. For the first time in months, I let myself cry without holding back. Every sob carried years of what-ifs, of love twisted with fear, of forgiveness that came too late to save him but just in time to save me. When I finally went home, I placed his letter on my bedside table. I couldn't sleep, but I also couldn't stop reading it, over and over until dawn spilled through my window like mercy. There was a strange calm that followed, a quiet understanding that pain doesn't disappear, but it can transform. Love doesn't die when someone leaves. It changes form, becomes something softer, something that teaches instead of tortures. I started journaling the next morning. At first it was just words of grief, raw, ugly, and soaked with regret. But soon it turned into something else. I began writing letters to him, not to bring him back, but to free the pieces of myself I'd buried with him. Each word felt like a breath I hadn't taken in years, and slowly, I realized something powerful. Forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about reclaiming who you are despite it. He may have left this world, but he left me with the most painful, beautiful lesson of all. That love, even when broken, can still heal if you let it. And as I closed my journal that night, I whispered into the quiet, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's where I finally begin again. The days that followed were a blur of quiet moments and loud memories. Grief is strange like that. It doesn't just visit once and leave. It lingers. It crawls into your mornings, sits beside you at lunch, and follows you into dreams that turn into restless nights. I remember walking through town one afternoon, past the same coffee shop where he first asked me out. The same red brick walls, the same smell of roasted beans, the same sunlight spilling across the wooden floor. But everything felt different now, like the world kept spinning without asking if I was ready to move with it. I walked inside anyway. The barista, a kind young man with kind eyes, asked what I wanted. "Just black," I said. My voice barely held steady. I sat at our old table in the corner, tracing the faint scratches on the surface where his ring once tapped when he laughed. And for a moment, I swore I could still hear it, the echo of that laugh, deep and boyish, the kind that used to fill the room and make strangers smile without knowing why. I wanted to hate him for leaving. I wanted to scream that he should have stayed, should have fought harder, should have chosen help instead of silence. But sitting there in that small coffee shop, surrounded by strangers who had no idea my whole world had ended, I realized something. I didn't hate him. I missed him, terribly. And missing someone isn't weakness. It's proof that love was real. I started to see signs of him everywhere. A song playing at the grocery store. The scent of his cologne in an elevator. A man on the street wearing the same denim jacket he used to wear. Each time, my chest tightened, but slowly, those moments began to hurt less. Instead of feeling like knives, they started to feel like whispers from heaven. One evening, I found myself sitting on my porch, watching the sunset melt into the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of gold and violet, and for the first time in months, it didn't make me ache. It made me breathe. That's when my neighbor, Mrs. Grant, stopped by. She was one of those older women who carried wisdom like perfume, strong, comforting, unforgettable. "You've been quiet lately," she said, handing me a jar of peach jam. "Quiet can be healing," I replied softly. She smiled knowingly. "Or it can be heavy. Which one is it for you?" I hesitated. "Both," I admitted. She sat beside me, her eyes kind but sharp in the way only age can make them. "You know, my husband passed 15 years ago," she said. "I thought the world ended that day, but it didn't. It just changed. The trick is learning how to live in the change." I turned to her, tears gathering in my eyes. "How did you do it?" She smiled faintly. "I started planting roses. Every year, one for him. They kept dying the first few years, but then one day they bloomed. That's when I knew grief doesn't kill love. It grows it into something eternal." That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words replayed in my mind like a gentle prayer. So the next morning, I bought a small pot of roses and planted them in the backyard. My hands were trembling as I pressed the soil around them, but it felt like something sacred, like I was giving my pain somewhere to rest. As the weeks passed, tending to those roses became my quiet ritual. Each morning I'd water them, whispering small thoughts into the air. Some to him, some to God, some to the parts of myself I was still trying to forgive. One morning, I woke to find the first bloom, a soft pink petal unfolding in the sunlight. I knelt beside it, tears streaming down my cheeks, because somehow it felt like he was still here. Not in body, not in voice, but in spirit, in the beauty that still dared to exist after everything fell apart. I started to notice life again after that. The laughter of children playing down the street, the smell of rain on warm pavement, the comfort of morning light spilling across my kitchen floor. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving the day, I was living it. But grief is never linear. Just when I thought I was healing, a memory would hit me out of nowhere and knock the wind out of me. One evening, I found an old voicemail from him. His voice filled the room, soft and uncertain, saying, "Hey, I just wanted to hear your voice." I broke down. But instead of letting the pain swallow me whole, I let it wash over me. Because I'd learned that feeling deeply, even the hard feelings was better than feeling nothing at all. I started going to church again too, not because I had all the answers, but because I needed to believe that somewhere beyond this ache, there was redemption. I'd sit in the back pew, quiet, listening to the hymns, the sound of faith rising in voices around me. Sometimes I'd cry. Sometimes I'd just close my eyes and whisper, "God, help me see purpose in this." And slowly, I did. One Sunday, the pastor spoke about forgiveness. He said, "Forgiveness isn't saying what they did was okay. It's saying your heart deserves peace more than it deserves revenge." Those words hit me like lightning. I realized I'd been forgiving him for leaving, but not myself for not saving him. I'd carried guilt like a chain around my neck. So that night, I stood by the river, the same one where his car was found, and whispered, "I forgive you, but I forgive me too." The wind picked up, carrying my words into the dark, and for a moment I felt something like peace. Not the kind that erases the pain, but the kind that lets you breathe in spite of it. From that night on, I made a promise to live the life he couldn't. To love harder, speak softer, and find beauty even in the broken places. Because love, even when lost, doesn't end. It transforms. And maybe that's the real miracle of it. The seasons began to change. And with them, so did I. The sharp sting of grief started to dull. Though it never vanished completely, it just softened around the edges, like a scar that still aches when it rains. The roses in my backyard grew taller, their stems stronger, their petals richer in color. Every morning I'd step outside with my coffee and whisper, "You'd like these," imagining him somewhere beyond the clouds, smiling that crooked smile of his, finally at peace. But healing doesn't come wrapped in perfection. It comes with relapses. Days when you wake up feeling like you've moved backward, when your chest still tightens at the sound of his name. I had those days, more often than I wanted to admit. There were mornings when I couldn't even look in the mirror because the reflection staring back at me still looked like a woman waiting for someone who wasn't coming home. One rainy afternoon, I went up to the attic to look for old photo albums. The air smelled of dust and wood, and the sound of raindrops tapping the roof felt almost comforting. As I dug through boxes, I found a small wooden crate I didn't remember packing. Inside were mementos from our years together, ticket stubs, handwritten notes, little pieces of a life that once felt invincible. At the bottom, there was a Polaroid photo of us sitting by the lake, both barefoot, both laughing like time didn't matter. I traced my fingers over his face and whispered, "Why did you go?" The silence that followed was louder than any answer. I stayed there for hours, surrounded by fragments of the past, torn between wanting to hold on and needing to let go. Eventually, I put everything back in the box, except the photo. That one I kept. I placed it on my dresser beside the rose from the first bloom, now dried but still beautiful in its own quiet way. That night something shifted. I dreamed of him, not the broken version that left this world, but the one I met years ago. He was standing under a tree, sunlight flickering through the leaves, his eyes clear, his smile warm. He didn't say anything, but his presence felt like peace. When I woke up, I realized that maybe love doesn't need to speak. It just needs to be remembered in truth, not tragedy. Around that time, I started volunteering at a local support group for people who'd lost someone to depression. At first, I was terrified. I didn't think I was strong enough to sit in a room full of other broken hearts. But something inside me whispered, "Go." So I did. The first night, The room was quiet except for the hum of a coffee machine and the sound of nervous breathing. People shared their stories, raw, messy, unfiltered pain. A father who lost his son. A sister who found her brother too late. A young woman who couldn't stop blaming herself. Their words cracked something open inside me. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated. My throat tightened, my palms shook, but I said it anyway. I lost someone too. He loved deeply, but he carried more darkness than I could ever see. And for a long time I thought I failed him. But maybe love isn't about saving someone. It's about being the light that shows them where peace might be. The room fell silent. Then one by one, people nodded, eyes glistening with tears. That was the night I realized pain can be holy when it's shared. It doesn't disappear, but it transforms into something bigger. Something that connects strangers and reminds us that we're not alone. I kept going back every week. Each story I heard became another thread in the fabric of healing. And slowly, I stopped feeling like a woman haunted by loss and started feeling like someone reborn through it. One evening, after one of those meetings, I walked out into the cool night air and looked up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small beneath them. I felt connected, like maybe he was one of them now, shining down just enough to remind me that love never truly dies. Months passed. I started writing again, not just in my journal, but in letters I'd never send. Letters to others who were hurting, to women like me who'd lost their way in the fog of grief. I began posting those letters online, anonymously at first. To my surprise, people started responding. Messages poured in from strangers saying, "Your words helped me," or "I thought I was the only one who felt like this." And in that digital sea of pain and hope, I found purpose again. One night, as I was responding to messages, I received one that stopped me cold. It was from a woman named Clara. She wrote, "Your story saved me tonight. I was sitting in my car, ready to give up, but I found your post instead. You reminded me that maybe I'm still worth fighting for." I sat there staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face. It hit me then. Maybe this was what he would have wanted. For his story, for our love, to become a light for someone else's darkness. The next morning, I walked back to the river. The wind was softer this time, the water glimmering under the morning sun. I held the dried rose in my hand, the one from that first bloom, and whispered, "We did it. Your pain became someone's hope." Then, with a deep breath, I let the rose fall into the water and watched it drift away. It didn't sink. It floated, carried by the current, free. And for the first time, I felt free too. As I walked back home, I realized something profound. Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about transforming it. It's about turning the wounds into windows so light can get through. I still missed him, and maybe I always would, but missing him no longer felt like punishment. It felt like proof that love, once real, never fades. It just finds new ways to live. Winter came quietly that year, like it didn't want to disturb the fragile peace I had built. The mornings were colder, the nights longer, but inside my heart, something had shifted. I was no longer running from the silence. I was learning to live in it. Each day started the same way, a cup of coffee steaming by the window, the soft hum of a song playing in the background, and the sight of my roses, now bare and sleeping under the frost. Even stripped of color, they were beautiful, resilient in their stillness, patient in their waiting. Maybe that's what grief teaches you, to wait. Not for things to go back to the way they were, but for your soul to learn how to bloom again, differently this time. I found myself writing more often. It started with journal entries, but soon became short essays, reflections on loss, hope, and the strange grace that hides in heartbreak. I shared them online, and people kept writing back. Every message felt like a small miracle, proof that even the pieces of a shattered heart could still create something meaningful. Then one afternoon, I received an email from a woman named Teresa, who ran a small local magazine. She said she'd been following my writings and asked if I'd consider contributing a column about healing. My hands trembled as I read her message. For so long, I'd been the woman barely holding it together, and now someone wanted me to write about healing. It felt ironic, and yet maybe that was exactly why I should. I said yes. The first column I wrote was titled, "Where Love Goes When It Can't Stay." I poured everything into it, the lessons I learned, the forgiveness I found, the truth that love doesn't vanish, it evolves. When it was published, I was terrified. I thought people might see through me, might realize I was still learning how to breathe. But the responses were overwhelming. Letters came in from people all over the country, men, women, widows, dreamers, all saying the same thing. Your words made me feel seen. That's when I realized something powerful. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's strength dressed in honesty. Around that time, I started mentoring young women at the community center. Most of them were half my age, bright, determined, but carrying the invisible bruises of life. They'd come to me after class, saying things like, "Ms. Lillian, how do you stop loving someone who broke you?" I'd smile sadly and tell them the truth. You don't. You just learn to love them differently, and then one day, that love becomes a part of your strength. One evening, after a long day of mentoring, I walked home through the snow-covered streets. Christmas lights twinkled in windows, laughter echoed from somewhere down the block, and for the first time in years, the holiday season didn't feel lonely. It felt tender. When I got home, I found an old box of ornaments. Inside were a few that he and I had bought together years ago. There was one shaped like a small wooden heart with our initials carved into it. I held it for a long time, feeling the weight of both sorrow and gratitude. That night, I hung it on the tree, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what I'd learned. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky, but deliberate. It was from Mrs. Harris, his mother. My breath caught as I opened it. She wrote, "I've been reading your columns. I wanted to thank you for giving my son's story a second life, not one of tragedy, but of transformation. I see him in your words and it comforts me." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Not the shattered kind of crying that used to leave me gasping, but the kind that comes from gratitude. A quiet release that feels like rain after drought. I decided to visit her. When she opened the door, she looked older but softer, like time had wrapped her in gentleness. We hugged for a long time, and neither of us said a word. Sometimes, silence carries more healing than words ever could. Inside, her house was filled with photos of him, childhood smiles, teenage mischief, adult dreams. On the mantel was a candle burning beside one of my magazine clippings. She noticed my eyes on it and said, "He would have been proud of you, you know. You gave his pain a purpose." That night, as I drove home, snow began to fall again, thick, quiet flakes drifting through the air like feathers. I pulled over on the side of the road, turned off the car, and just watched. There was something so peaceful about the world being blanketed in white, as if everything broken could be made new again, even if just for a while. When I got home, I lit a candle by the window and whispered, "Thank you for loving me, for teaching me, for reminding me that light doesn't vanish when love ends." The flame flickered, and in that soft glow, I felt his presence, warm, gentle, forgiving. A few weeks later, the magazine called. They wanted to turn my column into a book. I was stunned. Me, a woman who once couldn't find the words to say goodbye, was now being asked to share her story with the world. I said yes, though part of me trembled at the thought. But deep down, I knew it was time. Writing that book was both agony and salvation. Every chapter felt like opening an old wound, yet every sentence stitched it back together with grace. I titled it, "Still I Rise, Letters from the Ashes of Love." When it was finally published, I stood in a small bookstore at the signing event, surrounded by people who had also lost, who had also learned to love again. One woman came up to me, holding her copy tightly, tears in her eyes. "Your book saved me," she said. "I thought I'd never find peace after my husband passed, but your story helped me believe again." I hugged her, because there were no words big enough to hold that kind of gratitude. That night, as I drove home, I realized something I'd been too afraid to say out loud. I was no longer surviving. I was living. Not the life I once imagined, but one I'd built from the ashes, piece by piece, with faith, forgiveness, and fierce love. And maybe that's the quiet truth about healing. It doesn't erase what broke you, it transforms it into something sacred. Something that whispers, even through tears, you made it through. The storm rolled in that night like the world itself had decided to weep. The sky was dark and heavy, rain falling in sheets so thick it blurred the outlines of the mountains. Nathan stood by the old barn window, his face pale under the flicker of lightning. Inside the barn, the smell of hay mixed with the metallic scent of rain and thunder. Every sound seemed to echo: the pounding of rain on the roof, the low hum of wind against the walls, and the steady beat of his heart that refused to calm. Grace was still inside the house, upstairs in her room. She hadn't spoken to Nathan since the argument that morning. The words he'd thrown at her kept replaying in his mind. Sharp, cruel things said out of fear, not truth. "You'll never understand what it's like to lose everything," he'd shouted. But she did understand. She had lost him long ago, when he'd stopped believing in hope. Nathan clenched his fists and whispered to himself, "What have I done?" He stepped outside, letting the rain soak through his clothes instantly. The cold bit through him, but it didn't matter. He needed to see her. Inside the house, Grace sat by the window, tears mixing with the rain that trickled down the glass. She was holding the wooden cross her mother had given her before she died. It had always been a reminder of strength through pain, but tonight it felt like a lifeline slipping through trembling fingers. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her chest, wild, untamed, merciless. Suddenly, a flash of lightning revealed Nathan running across the yard toward the house. She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to face him again, but her heart betrayed her reason. When she opened the door, the wind nearly ripped it from her hands. Nathan stood there drenched, breathless, and shaking. "Grace," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes searched his face, the same face that once made her believe in forever, the same man who had built walls so high she couldn't see inside anymore. "You think sorry fixes everything?" she asked, her tone trembling with both hurt and longing. "No," he said, stepping closer. "But it's a start." "I can't lose you, not again!" Lightning flashed again, illuminating their faces. He looked older, worn, but his eyes held something she hadn't seen in years: humility, the kind that comes only when a man finally breaks. Grace felt her anger fading, replaced by something deeper. Grief, maybe, or the fragile hope that somehow love could still grow from the ruins. She turned away, trying to steady her breath. "You said I didn't understand loss," she whispered. "But Nathan, I lost you the moment you stopped praying. The moment you stopped believing there was anything left to fight for." Her words cut through the noise of the storm like a blade. Nathan lowered his head, his voice cracking. "I know. I turned away from God, from you, from everything that mattered. I thought I could carry the pain alone. But I can't." For a moment, neither spoke. The storm roared louder, and the lights flickered before plunging the house into darkness. Grace's hands trembled as she lit a single candle, its flame glowing weakly between them. In that small circle of light, they stood face to face, two broken souls trying to find their way back. Nathan took her hand. It was cold, but she didn't pull away. "Grace," he said, "I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I need you to know I see it now. I see what I've done. I see who I became." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from anger. "You can't just come back because you're lonely," she whispered. "You have to come back because you believe again." "I do," he said. "I believe in him again, and I believe he sent me back to you." The candle flickered between them as if the flame itself hesitated, unsure whether to stay or die. Then Grace exhaled, her shoulders sinking as though a great weight had lifted. She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. "Then let's start over," she said quietly. "Not for us, but for what he's trying to rebuild." Outside, the thunder began to fade, replaced by the gentle sound of rain easing into silence. Nathan wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if the world might collapse if he let go. For the first time in years, he prayed aloud. His voice was rough, trembling, but filled with something real. Lord, forgive me. Thank you for not giving up on us. Grace closed her eyes, whispering, Amen. That night, they sat together by the candlelight, listening to the last drops of rain fall on the roof. Every sound seemed softer now, as if creation itself was sighing in relief. The storm had done its damage, yes, but it had also washed something clean. When morning came, the air smelled new. The fields shimmered with dew, and sunlight broke through the clouds in thin golden beams. Nathan stepped outside, looking toward the horizon where the mountains stood tall and unmoved. Grace followed him, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. He turned to her and said, I don't deserve this. Any of it. She smiled faintly. That's the point, Nathan. None of us do. That's why it's called grace. He looked at her, realizing how her name, Grace, had always carried the very message he'd been blind to. She was never just a woman he loved. She was a living reminder of mercy he didn't earn but was given anyway. As the sun rose, Nathan felt something shift deep within him, a peace he hadn't known in years. The storm hadn't destroyed him. It had stripped him bare, yes, but only so that something new could begin. And deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning of their redemption story. The days after the storm felt strangely quiet, almost too quiet, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The sky was a soft blue, the fields glistened with morning dew, and yet inside Nathan's heart, the silence was loud. He had prayed, truly prayed, for the first time in years, and something inside him had shifted. But peace doesn't erase the past. It only gives you the strength to face it. Nathan woke before dawn each morning, working on the fence that had been damaged by the storm. The wood was soaked, heavy, and splintered, but he didn't mind. It was honest work, something he could fix with his hands while trying to repair what was broken inside. Grace often watched him from the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, steam curling toward the light. She could see the weariness in his shoulders, but also the quiet determination that hadn't been there before. They talked more now, slowly, carefully. Their conversations were like fragile bridges being rebuilt one plank at a time. Some days they laughed again, soft, hesitant laughter that sounded foreign but beautiful. Other days, silence filled the room, not because they had nothing to say, but because some wounds still ached too deeply to touch. One afternoon, Grace found Nathan sitting on the back porch, staring at the old photo of his brother, Michael. His thumb traced the edges of the worn picture, his jaw tight. "You miss him, don't you?" she asked gently. He nodded, eyes distant. "Every day. He was the good one. He believed in God when I couldn't. I was supposed to protect him, Grace. But I didn't." Grace sat beside him, the wood creaking under her weight. "You didn't cause what happened, Nathan. You were just a boy." He turned to her, his eyes filled with years of guilt that had never found release. "I was 16. I told him to take my truck that night. He didn't come back. How am I supposed to live with that?" Her hand found his, steady and warm. "By remembering that God forgives what we can't forgive ourselves for." You think carrying guilt honors his memory, but it doesn't. It just keeps you chained to the past. Nathan swallowed hard. Her words struck deep. He had spent so long punishing himself that forgiveness had become a language he'd forgotten how to speak. "You make it sound easy," he murmured. Grace shook her head. "It's not easy. It's surrender. There's a difference." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air smelled of rain and pine, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell echoed faintly through the valley. Nathan looked up, almost startled by the sound. "I used to hate that bell," he said softly. "It reminded me of everything I'd lost. But now, I don't know. It feels like it's calling me back." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe it is." The next Sunday, for the first time in years, Nathan walked through the church doors. The small wooden chapel sat on the edge of town, its white paint chipped, its pews worn smooth by decades of prayer. As soon as he stepped inside, The familiar scent of old hymnals and candle wax hit him, and his throat tightened. Memories came flooding back, his mother's voice singing, Michael sitting beside him, the light filtering through stained glass. He felt the ache of everything he'd lost, but also the whisper of something new. When the pastor saw him, he paused mid-sermon, surprise flickering across his face before softening into a smile. "Welcome home, Nathan," he said gently. Nathan could barely nod. He sat beside Grace, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles whitened. The choir began to sing Amazing Grace, and for a moment, Nathan couldn't breathe. The words, "I once was lost, but now am found," pierced him like light through darkness. Tears burned his eyes. He hadn't cried in years, not even at the funeral. But now they came freely, falling onto his folded hands. Grace reached over and laced her fingers through his. It wasn't pity. It was love. The kind that doesn't try to fix you but simply stays beside you as you heal. After the service, they walked out together into the sunlight. The townspeople greeted Nathan warmly, some surprised, others quietly thankful. The air was filled with forgiveness, and Nathan realized how long he'd been starving for that kind of grace. That evening, they returned home and sat on the porch again. The sky was painted with soft shades of gold and rose, the kind of sunset that felt like a promise. Nathan turned to Grace and said, "Do you think God really forgives everything?" She smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Not everything, everyone. There's a difference." Her words lingered in his heart long after the sun went down. For the first time, he began to believe that maybe forgiveness wasn't something he had to earn. Maybe it was something that had been waiting for him all along. Days turned into weeks. The rhythm of life slowly returned to their small farm. Nathan repaired the barn roof, replanted the garden, and fixed the broken windmill that had once stood silent. Grace tended to the fields, humming softly as she worked, her voice carrying through the air like a prayer. There was peace between them now, fragile but real, but peace often invites the past to test its strength. One evening, as Nathan went into town for supplies, he ran into Mark, an old friend who had once worked with him before everything fell apart. Mark's face hardened the moment he saw him. "Well, look who's back," he said bitterly. The man who disappeared when things got tough. Nathan froze. He hadn't expected kindness, but the anger still stung. "I made mistakes," he said quietly. "Mistakes?" Mark's voice rose. "You cost us our jobs, Nathan. You walked away when we needed you. Do you think showing up in church makes it all better?" Nathan didn't answer. The shame rushed back like a flood. Mark shook his head. "You can't just pray away what you did. People don't forget that easy." As Nathan walked away, the words echoed in his mind, heavy and relentless. The peace he had built with such care began to tremble beneath the weight of old guilt. By the time he returned home, his heart was restless again, torn between the forgiveness Grace had spoken of and the punishment he still believed he deserved. That night, as he lay awake listening to the wind rustle the trees, he whispered a prayer, not for peace but for courage. "Lord, if you've really forgiven me, teach me how to live like it." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, soft and steady. And though he couldn't see it, Grace lay awake too, whispering her own prayer, for him, for herself, and for the strength to keep believing that even broken hearts could be made whole again. It was a Tuesday morning when everything he thought he had repaired began to unravel again. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the hills like it was holding back another storm. Grace had gone into town early to deliver fresh produce to the market, leaving Nathan alone on the farm. He liked those quiet hours, the hum of the windmill, the rhythmic cluck of hens, the soft creak of the porch swing. It made him feel steady again, almost normal. But peace has a way of testing its own boundaries, and that day, it came knocking in the form of a dusty blue truck rumbling up the long dirt road. Nathan recognized it instantly. The dent on the left fender, the faded license plate, it belonged to Sheriff Collins. His chest tightened. He hadn't seen the man since the day he left town years ago, the day he'd signed the papers that ended his company, the day everything fell apart. The sheriff stepped out. Tall, broad, with lines of time etched deep into his face. He wasn't angry, just tired, like someone who'd seen too many second chances wasted. "Morning, Nathan," he said, tipping his hat slightly. Nathan wiped his hands on his jeans, his heart pounding. "Morning, Sheriff. What brings you out here?" Collins leaned against his truck, folding his arms. "Heard you've been back in church. Folks been saying you're trying to make things right." Nathan nodded slowly. "I am. Trying, at least." The sheriff's gaze softened, but there was something cautious behind his eyes. "That's good. But you should know, there's talk going around. Some folks are saying you might have covered up what happened at the site before the company went under. Missing funds, broken contracts. You know how rumors are." Nathan's stomach dropped. He had expected whispers, maybe judgment, but not this. "That's not true," he said firmly. "I didn't steal anything. I was reckless, yes, but I didn't take a dime that wasn't mine." "I believe you," Colin said quietly. "But you might want to be careful. Not everyone's ready to forgive as easily as you hope." The words landed heavy, like thunder rolling across a distant mountain. Nathan watched the sheriff drive away, the dust swirling behind him. He stood there for a long moment, the wind tugging at his shirt, the air thick with unease. That evening, Grace noticed the change in him. He was quieter at dinner, barely touched his food, and kept staring at the window as if waiting for something to happen. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then told her everything. The sheriff's visit, the rumors, the fear that maybe no matter how much he tried, the past would always find him. Grace listened without interrupting, her face calm, but her eyes full of understanding. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Nathan, you can't control what people say. You can only control who you are now." He sighed, his voice rough. "But what if they don't believe I've changed? What if they only ever see the man I was?" She squeezed his hand tighter. "Then let them. The truth doesn't need defending. It needs living." Her words stayed with him long after she went to bed. He sat alone on the porch, watching the night sky fade into deep blue. The air smelled like rain again, and the sound of frogs carried from the nearby creek. For the first time, he realized that redemption isn't about what others see. It's about what God sees, and whether you're willing to keep walking forward when no one claps for you. 2 days later, the storm broke. A letter arrived at their doorstep, folded neatly inside an envelope with no return address. Grace found it and handed it to Nathan while he was fixing the porch railing. He opened it with a trembling hand. Inside were a few typed words. "You can't bury what you stole." His vision blurred for a moment, the paper crumpling slightly in his fist. Grace saw the color drain from his face. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tense. He passed her the letter silently. She read it, then looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Who would do this?" "I don't know," he said, voice low. "But I have a guess." That night, Nathan drove into town. The rain had started again, a steady curtain that blurred the world into shades of silver. He pulled up outside a dimly lit bar, the kind of place he used to hide in when guilt became too heavy to carry. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and cheap whiskey, and sitting at the corner table was Mark. Nathan approached slowly. Mark looked up, surprise flashing across his face before it hardened into something colder. "Didn't think you had the guts to come here," he said. "I got your letter," Nathan said quietly. "You've made your point. You're angry. You've got every right to be. But this isn't the way," Mark smirked, swirling his drink. "The truth always finds its way out, Nathan. You played saint long enough. People deserve to know what kind of man you really are." Nathan's fists clenched at his sides. "I've made mistakes, Mark. I've hurt people, including you. But I didn't steal anything." "You know that," Mark slammed his glass down. "You think going to church wipes it all clean?" "You left us to pick up the pieces. You ran while we took the fall." Nathan's voice broke. "I didn't run, I broke. There's a difference." For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and trembling. The rain outside grew louder, like it was trying to drown out the noise of their past. Then, something inside Mark shifted. His anger faltered, just a flicker, but enough for Nathan to see the pain beneath it. "I lost everything too," Mark said quietly. "My house, my marriage, my name. And you just disappeared." Nathan sat down across from him. "I know, and I'm sorry. If I could go back, I would have done it differently, but I can't change the past. I can only live differently now." Mark stared at him for a long time, his eyes glistening. Then he sighed, shaking his head. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do," Nathan said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want peace." Mark leaned back, his expression softening. "You might never get it from everyone, but maybe that's not the point." When Nathan walked out of the bar, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the streetlights, and for the first time in a long while, he felt light. The letter didn't matter anymore. The past didn't own him. When he returned home, Grace was waiting by the window, worry etched across her face. The moment he stepped inside, she rushed to him. "Are you okay?" He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I think I am." She looked at him, searching his eyes for the truth. "What happened?" "Closure," he said simply. "The kind that doesn't fix everything, but lets you breathe again." She smiled softly and leaned her head on his shoulder. They stood there in the quiet, the house filled with the sound of the rain easing into a gentle rhythm. That night, as Nathan drifted to sleep, a deep peace settled over him. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't final, but it was real. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The morning after his talk with Mark, I woke before the sun, the house still wrapped in silence. I watched Nathan sleep, his face softer than I'd seen in years. Peace suited him, even if it was fragile, even if it had taken so long to find. There's a kind of beauty in brokenness when it finally learns how to rest. Outside, the world smelled fresh, the soil dark and rich from the night's rain. The fields shimmered beneath a golden dawn. It was the kind of morning that made you believe new beginnings weren't just for the young. Nathan woke slowly, stretching before glancing at me with that quiet, humble smile I'd come to love. "You've been watching me again," he said, his voice rough with sleep. I smiled back. "Just making sure you're still breathing," he chuckled softly, the sound warm, alive. "I'm still here. Still trying. Trying is enough," I whispered, and I meant it. We spent the day together, working side by side in the garden. The air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers. The ground, though damp, was soft and forgiving, much like Grace itself. Every shovel Nathan drove into the soil felt like a declaration. I'm not who I used to be. I'm becoming someone new. At noon, we sat under the oak tree, sharing cold tea and quiet laughter. It struck me then how much life could change, how God could take something shattered and make it whole again in his own time. The Nathan I met months ago was a man haunted by ghosts, his brother's death, his failures, his shame. The Nathan sitting beside me now was still marked by his past, but he no longer lived there. He'd built something stronger on top of the ruins. Later that afternoon, we drove into town for Sunday service. The sky stretched wide and blue, dotted with white clouds drifting like soft promises. As we pulled up to the small church, I saw familiar faces, people who had once whispered behind our backs now waving with genuine smiles. Grace isn't only what God gives. Sometimes it's what a community learns to extend. Inside, the church felt different, warmer, fuller. The same wooden pews, the same cracked stained glass. But the air felt alive. Nathan took my hand as the choir began to sing, "Come thou fount of every blessing." His voice trembled at first, then grew stronger, carried by something deeper than words. When Pastor Hughes took the stage, his eyes lingered on Nathan before he began. "Today," he said, "we're talking about redemption. Not the kind you earn, but the kind you accept when you've run out of reasons to believe you deserve it." Nathan's grip on my hand tightened. I could feel the tears he was holding back. After the service, Pastor Hughes approached him. "You've been through a storm, son," he said softly. "But remember, storms don't destroy what's rooted deep. They just show you what needs rebuilding." Nathan nodded, eyes glistening. "I thought I had to fix everything before I could come back. Turns out I just needed to stop running, the pastor smiled. That's usually where grace begins. That night, back home, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of violet and gold. Nathan stood on the porch, watching the last light fade. I joined him leaning against the railing. Funny, he said. I spent half my life trying to bury the past, and now I see it was never about forgetting. It was about learning. What did you learn? I asked quietly. He turned toward me, his expression tender but strong. That forgiveness doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means choosing not to be its prisoner anymore. And faith, it's not about never falling. It's about getting up every single time you do, trusting that God's still not done with you yet. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying his words away like seeds into the open air. I knew then this was the man he was always meant to become, not perfect, but real. Not unscarred, but redeemed. A few weeks later, Nathan decided to visit his brother's grave for the first time in years. We drove up the winding hill road, the world around us painted with the golden brush of late summer. When we reached the small cemetery, he walked ahead carrying a single white rose. He knelt by the headstone, his hand trembling as he placed the flower down. "Hey, Mike," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have come sooner. I thought staying away would make it hurt less. But the truth is, the hurt was never the enemy. Fear was. I was afraid to face what I'd done. Afraid to see your name and remember. But I know now you wouldn't have wanted me to drown in guilt. You'd have wanted me to live. So I'm living now, brother. I'm finally living." I stood back, tears streaming down my face. In that sacred silence, I felt it. The weight of all those years lifting off him, piece by piece, like chains falling to the ground. On the drive home, Nathan turned to me, his eyes clear and steady. "You know," he said, "maybe the greatest miracle isn't walking on water or moving mountains. Maybe it's learning to forgive yourself." I smiled through my tears. "I think you're right." That evening, we sat by the fire, the house bathed in soft orange light. The air hummed with peace. And for the first time, Nathan shared a dream he'd been holding close. "I want to help others," he said. "People like me, the ones who think they've fallen too far. Maybe I could start a small group at church, a place where people can talk, be honest, not feel judged." My heart swelled with pride. "You should. Tell them your story." He looked at me, eyes glowing with that quiet courage that only comes from surviving the storm. "It's not just my story," he said. "It's ours. It's God's story written in the cracks of broken people who said yes to being healed." I reached for his hand. "Then let's keep telling it." He smiled, and I swear in that moment, the whole room seemed to breathe. And here's what I want everyone watching this to remember. Redemption is not a one-time event. It's a journey, a daily choice to walk toward light even when shadows follow. It's forgiving yourself when the world refuses to. It's believing that no matter what you've lost, grace can still find you right where you are. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share it. Tell someone who's struggling that they are not alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about faith, second chances, and the power of love, subscribe to this channel. Because here we don't just tell stories, we remind people that it's never too late to begin again. So wherever you are, take a deep breath. Let go of the guilt that's been weighing you down. Step forward. You're not too far gone. You're just one prayer, one act of courage, one moment of grace away from coming home. And maybe, just maybe, today is that moment.